Denzil Meyrick is a Scottish best-selling novelist. He previously served as a police officer with the Strathclyde Police, then a manager with Springbank Distillery in Campbelltown, Argyll. Since 2012, Denzil has written crime fiction novels. His latest book, Jeremiah's Bell, is published by the Scottish independent publisher Polygon. I'm Stuart Cosgrove, author and broadcaster, and Denzil has kindly agreed to talk to me about his new book. Denzil, a real pleasure to speak to you. We've not spoken for an age. Let's just start off with a very simple question. You can't judge a book by looking at its cover, or so they say, but we can have a really good try. I love the cover of this book. It's really, really, really atmospheric. Tell me about the cover and what it signifies.
Yeah, they've done a really good job with this cover, and the credit goes to the editorial team at Berlin Polygon, and also head design in London, who have really come up with something special. This is the most significant in terms of directing you to the plot, if you like. And so it's really atmospheric, it's really good, and it's really involved in what goes on in the book.
Your books are set in a very particular social situation and environment. Tell us about that place, its meaning, and the role that it plays within the books.
Yeah, Stuart, I mean, I think without Campbelltown, without Kintyre in general, the books would lose a great deal. And because it's one of these places that is the infamous hidden gem in Scotland, you know, you see all these celebrity travellers who go round about in barges and bikes and coracles, and inevitably they miss Kintyre. They go across from Wales to Northern Ireland, and they head from the Giant's Causeway either to Islay or to the Crinan Canal, inevitably missing out Kintyre entirely. And for me, it's one of the loveliest places, not just in Scotland, but anywhere in the world. And I want to bring that across in the books. And thankfully, I've had a lot of feedback from people who've read Daley across the globe, who love the description of the place and have indeed visited Campbelltown on the back of reading the books. So I would say that Kintyre, in essence, is a character in the books itself, and a very important one at that.
Yes, and that rugged, desolate, and kind of dramatic landscape features prominently in Jeremiah's Bell. Tell me exactly what Jeremiah's Bell is.
Jeremiah's Bell is the kind of leitmotif of the book, if you like. It sounds at the beginning, it sounds through the book, and it sounds at the very end of the book as well. It's as those who will read the book will discover, it was originally a ship's bell, but it becomes part of this family's history, the Doig family, who live very remotely on the Kintyre coast and lead a very strange and isolated life. I know that sounds an unusual thing to say in these days. But the bell itself is kind of the encapsulation of the novel, and it becomes a sort of sonic theme. It's like the Madeleine Proust, if you like.
Now, I want to just read from a little excerpt from the first chapter of the book, Denzil, because I want to go on to talk about the central character, DCI Daley. Quote, "Sometimes Daley was ashamed that he'd lost control, beaten his wife's tormentor mercilessly. But more often than not, the thought helped restore some equilibrium to his soul. He'd been quite prepared to face the consequences, face justice for what he'd done, but his victim refused to make a complaint." This is an immensely complicated central character with his own backstory. Just give us a kind of flavour of what motivates Daley and who he is as a character.
Yeah, I think Daley's. I don't want him to be a hackneyed detective, and you find a lot of these in crime fiction, not just in Scottish crime fiction, but across the whole gamut of the genre. This tired cop who's probably had a problem with drink, who's probably had a failed marriage, and Daley has got a semi-failed marriage, though it's not failed completely yet. I think he's a square peg. He's the proverbial square peg in a round hole. He joined the police at a time of transition, and he wasn't happy with the police service then because he thought there was still aspects of perhaps racism, sexism, which existed within every organisation in the late 80s, and some would argue still exists today, unfortunately. But the police have gone through that phase during his time as a police officer. And he now finds himself in a job where he's surrounded by graduates in a world where DNA and forensic evidence has come to the fore. And the whole essence of the job is different. So he's always found himself at odds with what's been happening around him. And I think he'd dearly love to do something else, but he's one of these guys who he just couldn't think. He didn't want to enter tertiary education, for example. So he's gone straight from high school into the police, if you like. And really, I think, despite being a chief inspector, which is no mean feat, I think he finds himself rather as an underachiever, or thinks of himself that way, not least because of his wife's attitude towards his career.
Later in the book, we see him actively on duty. And I want to just kind of read a little bit here again, Denzil, because it begs a slightly different question. Daley was on his stomach in some bushes about 500 yards from the Rowantree cottage. Beside him, Constable Ferns had a sighted rifle. Though he was wrapped up in 2 jumpers, a thermal fleece, and a heavy jacket, he was still frozen. As he watched the cottage through a small pair of binoculars, his gloved hands trembled with cold. Is Daley a reluctant activist? Is he someone that likes the cut and thrust of police work, the sense of being out there and doing it, maybe risking, maybe facing violence? Is he keen on that, or is he reluctant?
From the back of the last book, he's coming off some really major health problems, so he has to. In a way, he's refinding his feet. I mean, and that's a kind of another theme that goes through the book. In the beginning, we're not sure if Daley will be able to be re-established as a police officer because he's under probation, if you like. He's being examined by his superior, Carrie Simonton, who is his boss, his immediate superior, and she is carrying what should be a covert assessment of how he's performing, but he finds out about this quite early on because it's his faithful DS who's meant to be doing the covert assessing. So he has problems. He's not confident in himself in this book for various reasons, for what's happened before and his disciplinary, the background to the last book, and also because of his health problems. So we find Daley, I think, in Jeremiah's Bell, perhaps more vulnerable than he's been in any of the books.
There's a tendency, Denzil, to talk about the autobiography of it all. Is he someone that you see an element of yourself in?
Well, I think there's an element. I think it's impossible to write fiction without including part of oneself in the narrative and in characters. Certainly, there's a bit of me in Daley. I suppose he can be a solitary figure at times, and he likes to withdraw and read Patrick O'Brien or listen to the radio. He's not demonstrative in his actions. He's not one of these huggy, kissy kind of chaps. He's certainly not as demonstrative as Brian Scott, though. I wouldn't call him huggy and kissy either. But the whole right across the board, I think every character that a writer establishes in fiction has to have something of the experiences of the collective experiences of the author. And for me, Hamish, for example, who's a long-running character in the books, he is probably an amalgam of 3 or 4 people that I've known back home in Campbelltown. And so I draw on that. They're not directly in their personality, but facets of their personality come through. So everybody has a kind of past in my head somewhere, but what that past is and what my head's doing with it is another matter.
Well, let's talk about the afterwards, because the book tells its story. It's in many ways your classic kind of detective thriller. And then there's an afterword. The afterwards are about two things: prohibition in the USA and how that impacted on Scotland, and about frontal lobe psychosurgery. Strange stuff here, Denzil. Explain those two things.
Well, I came across, I'd always known about frontal lobotomies for many years, but I hadn't realised that this particular form of doing it and how widespread it was, and how it was carried out pell-mell and willy-nilly, if you like, sometimes by people who weren't even qualified medically or clinicians. And you'll find out more about that in the book. But it's a truly horrific way of treating what sometimes could be very minor ailments, such as insomnia, for instance. And it's a way of altering the brain chemistry in a very invasive and violent fashion. The prohibition side of it comes from my experience, as you mentioned earlier. I was at Springbank Distillery, and at one point there were 32 distilleries in Campbelltown. And it was after the war, or just leading up to the Second World War, they started, the 32 distilleries started to close down. And so there's always been a connection between what happened in America via prohibition and the decline of the whisky industry in Campbelltown. And I think it's fair to say also that the distilleries that are left there's 3 left now in the town, are of the highest order and richly deserve the regional status of Campbelltown whisky, which they enjoy. But a lot of the old distilleries were one-man jobs, two-men family firms, many of them run by farmers because they had the grains with which to make the whisky. And the prohibition, because of Campbelltown's location, handy for the Atlantic approaches straight across to the likes of Atlantic City, was a big player in bringing illegal booze into America at that time. And the apocryphal stories, of course, of Alphonsus Capone, who is rumoured apocryphally in Campbelltown to have played golf with McGrahan, as he was notorious for enjoying a game of golf, and visited the area 2 or 3 times. Whether that's true, we don't know, although there are people who would back up that theory. So I've combined this terrible form of psychosurgery, as you've mentioned, and prohibition, and turned it into a problem for Daley.
Denzil, we know that Al Capone died of venereal disease. I'll leave you to speculate where he might have caught it. There's also within the book, Denzil, if you like, a clash of eras, almost of traditions, where old and new worlds come into conflict with each other. So, for example, in the chapter 20, I'm struck, in fact, envious of the description of a character, Mike Strong, who has a passionate love of wirelesses, of old wirelesses, since his boyhood. And it says in the book, sure, quote, not only did he like listening, he collected radio sets to the extent that he was now surrounded and had around 200 of varying make, models and vintage. Every couple of days he'd head down to the basement of his large home and select a different radio to sit on his desk. Today it was a 1970s Hacker Sovereign clad in black leather, and one of his favourites. It sounded as fresh as the day he'd bought it, and he noted with pleasure the satisfying clunk as he switched it on. So these worlds of old and new, give us some kind of perspective on that.
Yeah, again, I think that's emblematic of the book as a whole. It is a clash of old and new. And if you like, Kintyre is a clash of old and new because, growing up there in the 70s, Kintyre was a wee bit behind the times. You could easily have been in the 50s. And that kind of past-present thing exists throughout the Daley series. And I think it's part of its charm. As far as Mike Strong is concerned, again, you talked about me bringing myself into characters. I mean, I collect radios, so I think I brought that to Mike Strong as part of his character. But the past-present thing does interest me in the fact the way the past plays on the present, and how we are all, the child is indeed father of the man, and the old community is father of the present community. We've done it before, but in this book we see it's a narrower focus on the one family, and that's what I think creates much of the tension in the novel.
There is a theory, Denzil, that great characters, whether it's detective fiction or comedy fiction, that great characters are trapped somewhere that they can never fully escape. Would you say that was true of some of your characters? Could Daley ever perform anywhere else? Is he trapped there, and is his entrapment a good thing or a bad thing?
I think Daley's trapped in a number of ways. He's trapped in a kind of loveless marriage. He's trapped in a job that perhaps he doesn't enjoy, as you've mentioned already. He can't see a way out of. And it's the dichotomy that he faces in his life. I don't think he's this entrapment makes him a particularly happy man. And by the same token, his faithful assistant and right-hand man, DS or DI Scott as he is acting at the moment, he finds himself inexorably attached or maybe even entrapped with Daley. So his timeline and Daley, and they have this absolute symmetry. And it's hard to imagine them working with somebody else, though that's a possibility that we might explore in times to come. But it's this sense of being entrapped, this sense of the somewhat claustrophobic nature of living in a small community with the burden of being one of its leading members, if you like, citizens, as chief of police, puts even more focus on him. And way back to the first book, he's stretching, just give him small glasses, he's stretching at a window. And he parts the net curtains, and there's two old ladies standing in the bus stop below, and he's only arrived in Kinloch at the time, and they wave at him enthusiastically, and he kind of reluctantly and quite embarrassed waves back. And that's his first taste of the close-knit nature of a small community. And you're right to say it's a kind of entrapment, but one perhaps he secretly enjoys.
Yes, he takes some kind of, if you like, kind of solace, sustenance from being trapped. But I was wondering also about landscape in a slightly different sense, in the kind of if you like, the power, the poetry, the drama of landscape. Chapter 14, the character of Nathaniel Doig finds himself on the cliff edge, and it says, quote, "He turned back to face the sea, the jutting point, the ragged finger of rocks to his left that had so shaped his life and would now in its own way shape what was left of it. When he turned back from the vista of rocks and sea, the figure was growing larger as it approached, each stride bringing Nathaniel too closer to the destiny he knew he could never escape." So there's a way where landscape also has this kind of dramatic power, almost in some respects poetic, but quite dramatic. And do you use landscape in that way, as almost, we talked earlier about almost it being a silent character or a silent witness within the drama?
The way you read it there, Stuart, it sounds like a contender for the Booker Prize. Yes, I think there's a certain amount of onomatopoeia going on there with the landscape. And you do find people in places that are shaped by landscape, especially in rural areas where perhaps generations of a family have either lived in a certain place or more likely farmed a certain area. And when you go back to Campbellton, for instance, down to Kintyre, families are often referred to by the name of their farm. Instead of being Mr. Armory's, Mr. Leftenstrath, or whatever the name of the farm is, and this goes down the generations. And you get the feeling somehow inexorably that the people and the place are connected, and that the land has a real force on individuals who live and work and live and love and spend their lives there. And through the books, I've always tried to use and because Kintyre has such a variant of landscape. I mean, you have the real rocky west side of the peninsula facing onto the Atlantic. It's rugged, it's rocky, it's stormy. And then you go across to the eastern side facing Arran and the Ayrshire coast, and it's quite fecund, and it's like Scotland in miniature in a way. And I use that variation in landscape to try and sometimes put across what I'm trying to say. And of course, it's always good to catch readers out as well, because it can be a lovely sunny day on a less spectacular piece of the Kintyre Peninsula, where normally you would expect nothing bad to happen, and it does. So it's also a good way, because we're in our eighth book now. You have a way of taking readers in and making them expect one thing, and then because they're so used to that, you can now draw them away and surprise them with something else. And I think that's also very handy. But landscape for me and Kintyre in general, I think plays a huge role, and indeed the warmth of the people. And every book I've written, I've always done my best to praise the people of Kintyre, who are unique and warm and funny and talented. And without them and the place in which I grew up, these books wouldn't have happened. And I very much doubt if I'd be a writer at all.
Denzil, you've written these many books and now built up a hugely successful franchise that's got readers around the world. How do you keep your character very much alive? Because committed readers like to return to the same detective with their foibles, to return almost again to the world that they love, rather than have the central character in a coma or killed off or written out of the book and a minor character popping up. So how do you keep people interested in the central character?
Yeah, I think with all the characters, not just Daley, there has to be a kind of saga element to it all, whereby you not only explore the past of the people involved, the ongoing characters, and there's 5 or 6 of them, but you explore their future and the dynamics of between them, as in any good saga. I think it was James Clavell that did the Japanese saga, which I enjoyed so much, and his books were enormous, and they were based in the history of a fictional Jardine Matheson company and how it sprang up, and it took it to the present day virtually. And you followed a whole family through generations. I'm following a set of characters through a period of time, and you have to find something new in them every time you revisit the books. Jim Daley still has sides of his character yet to be revealed, as does Brian Scott, as does Hamish, as does Annie, as does Liz, etc. So it's keeping things fresh and never being scared to do something surprising with a character that the reader might not expect. And so that's the way I've done it throughout. And I hope that comes across and people read it. It's like the old thing where people revisit books again and again and again, even though they know what's going to happen because they've read them before. And they do it because they want to be in that place. They know that they enjoy the people, they enjoy the place, they want to spend time back there. And so the ambience and the atmosphere and the book and the characterization is so important. It's just not all plot driven.
Yeah, and Daley exists, how could we say it, almost in a permanent past. You're very cleverly strip away any kind of extraneous things that could locate him in a very, very specific moment. So, there's a tendency in some books for them to refer to the pop music of the time or the immediate fashions of the time or the politics of the time. And whilst there may be a virtue in that, it has the impact of kind of making their character feel as if they're aging. Whereas Daley is someone that seems in that permanent past.
Yeah, the books are stuck in a kind of past present. I remember watching Heartbeat, and every tax disc that you saw in the cars and the motorbikes and that show, it always read December 1969, right through the 12-year run of the show. And it was certainly set in the 60s, and you knew it was the 60s, but the show ran longer than the decade did in reality. And that's kind of like Daley. I mean, they do reference pop music. He's a fan of the Blue Nile, for instance, Jim Daley, because they're gloomy and a bit sad like him. But I think you have to. There are writers who have written in real time, and Scottish crime writers. Ian Rankin is an example, and you know, Ian's a wonderful writer, and he very much pioneered the genre we now call tartan noir. Whether you like that name or not, I'm not a great fan of it. But he decided to write Rebus in real time, and I wonder if Ian could go back to the beginning, because none of us knows what's going to be happening when we write our first book and what's ahead for you as a writer or for the books. I wonder if he would have made another decision on that. I don't know. So I've tried to avoid that pitfall so that I can keep Daley going for as long as I can. And let's be honest, he'll probably outlast me.
Yeah. They'll bring in ghost writers when you're gone. No doubt about that, Denzil.
Warming up there, yes.
Yes. Well, one of the things that does interest me is that although this is set in this kind of claustrophobic world, it clearly is conscious of a world beyond, and then inevitably the Americans arrive. Tell us about your American characters.
I'm very interested in America because my family's connections to New York going way back, and whether I've been doing a lot of research on ancestry recently, and I'm not sure if all these characters from the past were exactly as upstanding as they maybe should have been, but the Americans are in this book are 1920s. Gangsters from New Jersey and from New York. And they play the role, again, like the Doig family, they tie together past and present. And there are gangsters old and new, there's gangsters from the present, there's gangsters from the past. And they bring that connection that we've talked about before between the Prohibition era and its effect on the real Campbelltown, and the Prohibition era and its effect on my fictitious Kinloch. So they're there to, they add a bit of colour, but they're not just for that. They're not just ornamental. They're there to provide a very real part in the story. And I think they're quite colourful, as American gangsters tend to do. And I'm fascinated by that whole genre. Sitting me in front of anything by Marty, as I call him, and I'll happily sit there for hours. I mean, I don't know how many times I've watched The Irishman now, for instance, which I thought cruelly missed out on the awards it should have garnered in last year. I think he's a great filmmaker. I think anything The Sopranos, for instance, is pivotal to the evolution of the Daley books. Because if you examine Daley closely enough, there is a definite correlation between there's elements of Jim Daley and Tony Soprano, and I know that sounds hard to imagine in the beginning, but if you look at them closely, they do have many similarities, and I loved the way they played, as they often do with American Gangster, the best American Gangster film and TV adaptations and shows, films. They have that mixture of humour and visceral violence, which you also find in the Daley books.
Great stuff. That's given me my cliche for all time now, Dens. I'm going to say it's The Sopranos set in Scotland, Denzil, it's been wonderful talking to you. Can I just ask you, finally, where the books are now? Where can you read them? What territories in the world seem to have a liking for the books? Give us the kind of sales spiel.
The sales spiel. Well, as you know, when it comes to books in general, the world's become a much smaller place due to companies like Amazon, who make books available in some platform, virtually across the world. But the books are available in translation in Germany. We've just done a deal in Italy, which I maybe shouldn't say too much about because it's even though it's signed and sealed, we're still to make the public announcement. But take it as read that we've done that with one of the largest publishers in Italy for a daily translation over there. They are well available in North America in ebook, print, and audiobook form, and they're doing very well in Australia and New Zealand, I'm glad to say. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they do well in these places because there's a large Scottish diaspora, and it's of interest to people there, and not just people with Scottish heritage, but others as well. Very edifying and gratifying for me as a writer to have that kind of reach and success, and there's nobody been more surprised than me at it, and but very grateful at the same time.
Well, Denzil, we were intended to meet up in a public place to launch Jeremiah's Bell on the World. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic chose otherwise, and we've done it here via Clean Feed on the World Wide Web. But can I just thoroughly congratulate you on the publication of the book and wish it great good fortune going forward. Denzil Meyrick, a pleasure to speak to you as ever, and we'll speak soon in the real world.